And this is No Hate Radio.
I'm no stranger to the rain. Oh, no. I'm no stranger to the rain.
Welcome to No Hate Radio. Thanks for listening. No Hate Radio broadcasts on the Allendale Equity and Justice Channel, broadcasting from St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm Don Windle, your host and facilitator. I'm joined by our producer, Cameron Helwege. Here at No Hate Radio, we seek to address issues of our time at the intersection of law, social justice, and public policy. We seek to elevate the dialogue around controversial issues by honest and open discussion, asking why and what are we going to do about it, excluding only hate. Today, we're continuing our series addressing the lives and challenges of LGBTQ plus persons as relates to organized religion and the church. In that regard, we are privileged today, and I seriously mean that, to have speakers who are and have been at the very forefront of the struggle within the United Methodist Church regarding the status, place, and role of LGBTQ plus and other marginalized groups, and we're at ground zero these past 2 weeks when monumental change occurred, at least in one Christian denomination. You'll hear today from Helen Ryde, Reverend Andy Oliver, and our own producer, Cameron Helwege, as they relate their experiences, both past and present, in the long and often painful process of division and reconciliation, culminating with experiences last week or within the last 2 weeks of what I have dubbed ground zero or landing zone X-ray to emphasize the importance of the events that just occurred. And without going too much further into any monologue by me, I would like to give a little intro of the speakers who are going to be talking here today, because they're the people that I would like for the listeners of No Hate Radio to pay careful attention to. Helen Ryde. Helen was born and brought up in the UK, moved to the United States back in 1998. Key point is Helen has been on the organizing team at the Reconciling Ministries Network since 2012. Prior to that, having had a career both in a financial service company and as a special needs teacher. They have a postgraduate degree in secondary education from Canterbury Christ Church University. Helen was consecrated as a home missioner in the Order of Deaconess and Home Missioners in 2016. Helen lives at Lake Junaluska, I hope I said that correctly, North Carolina, with their spouse, Kate. And with that, I will move forward to Andy Oliver. Andy Oliver is someone that I've known for a long time. He's the senior pastor at Allendale United Methodist Church, and he has been on the absolute front lines ever since way before I knew him. In the struggle and the division and the reconciliation and the guiding of a congregation into the truly reconciling congregation that it is today. Cameron Helwege, as I've said before, can't say enough good about him. He's our producer on No Hate Radio. He's creative director for Allendale United Methodist Church. He's worked in the creative side and technological side of ministries for many years, and he's been a close affiliate and associate with Andy Oliver over a lot of years. These are three very significant people in the subject matter that we're going to discuss today. I've been a virtually lifetime member of the Methodist and then United Methodist Church, and have been aware of a lot of struggles in that regard that have gone on in the United Methodist Church philosophically and in terms of our relationship with various members and those who have been frankly mistreated by the church. So, in the last 2 weeks, some big stuff happened. And I would ask Helen to start off the conversation.
Well, first off, Don, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the invitation to be on your podcast. I really appreciate it. You know, you might laugh, but I have had spiritual direction and therapy this morning as I try to unpack all that happened in the last 2 weeks, because it was, I mean, this was the culmination of literally decades of work by hundreds, I would say, if not thousands, of United Methodists across the connection towards reversing, the dreadful language that Scott started in 1972. So it was a monumental undertaking from the beginning. And what we experienced the last 2 weeks is, I feel privileged to have been part of it. And the fact that I was a delegate and could literally press the button yes on those petitions that got rid of the dreadful language was extraordinary. But I just want us to make sure we're understanding this. And I know, Andy and Cameron understand this too, that what happened in the last 2 weeks was so much bigger than it felt at the time. I don't know, Andy, if you resonate with that at all, but
Absolutely.
in the end, it felt almost anticlimactic because it was quote unquote easy. It wasn't easy, for the last 52 years. It was devastatingly hard and traumatic and terrible. But when it came down to the last 2 weeks and actually finally getting rid of the bad language, it was kind of straightforward. I don't know what you think about that, Andy, but that's kind of my feeling about it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And just to put it into some context, 52 years ago in 1972, the conference sought to make a really beautiful affirming statement about LGBTQ people. And that statement passed committee, came to the floor, and a delegate from Texas named Don Hand got up and amended it, proposing this language that stayed with us all these years as this evil, saying that homosexual persons, the practice of homosexuality was incompatible with Christian teaching. And every 4 years, Methodists gathered back together and we sought to remove that language, and it got worse and worse. There were 13 meetings where Methodists gathered trying to make things better, to try to make a better church, and things got worse. And it wasn't until 2019 when the conservatives, the traditionalists, decided to, instead of make a compromise, they decided to make things as bad as possible. And when they did that, moderates, the middle, moved to the left. They said, this isn't who we are. This isn't the church we want to be a part of. And the conservatives found themselves in the minority. And as a result of the last couple of years, 25% of Methodist churches that identify more conservatively left the denomination. And so here we were these last 2 weeks in Charlotte with a new makeup of our church, but still a worldwide body that has different perspectives on human sexuality. We came together, and sometimes by 91%, sometimes by 65%, we changed our rules to be loving and inclusive.
I'd like to, at this point, interject. Cam, I know you were there. I know you were participating in this. I know you've got a lot of years invested in this. Can you give us kind of I know it's difficult to sit here and sitting in this podcast later, but can you give us a feeling or an emotional reaction to the way things happened at this conference from your perspective? Because I know you're involved in it day and night for the whole 2 weeks.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start off by saying this was the first general conference that I attended in person. I watched 2016, I watched portions of that online, and I watched a good bit of 2019 online. And the mood around that was so heartbreaking and depressing. And then coming here to this one, there's just this, it's just a really positive energy from the moment we stepped into the convention center. And I mean, the reaction when the rules fell, when the words were struck from the Book of Discipline, it was just, there was this sense of joy and relief, but at the same time, there's a little bit of grief. Why was it so easy this time? Why did it have to be so hard in the past? Why did it take a quarter of the church leaving in order for this to happen? And so there's joy, but there's also a heaviness at the same time.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, part of the heaviness was those people not in the room that Helen mentioned.
Yeah.
People that labored along the way and needed to escape the toxicity or that died. That those people were definitely present with us in spirit.
Helen, aside from the objective awareness of what was going on, do you have something you might share with us about that too? How you felt as that went on?
Yeah, I think one of the things as I've been trying to process this is what I was noticing in myself through most of the 2 weeks was actually, I wouldn't necessarily call it a flat emotion, but I was much less emotional than I was expecting to be. I don't really know why. I think maybe it's because we were so keyed into the strategy and the work we've been doing in preparation for it that it was almost like we were executing a plan. And so there wasn't really much time for emotions to get involved in a way. The moment I felt the most was after we had voted the consent calendar, which removed the ordination ban. And Bishop Hope Morgan Ward got up to offer a prayer. And she asked us to put our hands on our heart and to bring to mind those who we remember in this moment of this ordination ban being lifted. And that was an overwhelming moment. And mostly it was a moment of, honestly, sadness. Because the people that came to mind were the people who are no longer here to celebrate what we'd just done. And so if anything, the feelings in the moment were actually of, grief and lament. Yes, there was joy that we finally got rid of it, but the predominant feeling for me at least was, and this carried through the whole rest of that week, was, why did it take so long? Why did it have to take 25% of the church leaving for us to get here? Why did it have to take the traditional pan passing to get us here? How many gifted human beings are no longer part of our denomination because of what we have held on to for so long? And so I think that was honestly, that was the prevailing emotion for me. And it's not because I wasn't grateful, but if I think about what I was feeling the most, that's what I was feeling the most.
I can certainly understand that, I believe, and relate to that. I've known Andy for a long time, but it's the first time that I ever saw him actually in tears in 4 national media
Yes.
Publications at one time. I know for a fact that Andy has not only stood on the cutting edge of this, but has done so at great risk to himself and to his family and his career. So, Andy, would you care to share your emotions with us about that?
Yeah, and I want to speak to that picture too. Cameron and I got to sit right in front of a group I called the Illuminati. This general conference was about organizing ourselves, and not just progressives, but moderates as well. And everyone bought into a strategy that we would make the United Methodist Church a regional body, meaning that the United States would be a region, Africa would be a region, the Philippines would be a region, and each would be on an equal plane rather than the church being U.S.-centric and having satellite parts of the church that kind of replicated colonialism and did some harm. And so that was goal number one. That would also free up the United States to vote and have our own unique book of discipline as well as a general discipline that we shared with everyone. And then we wanted to revise the social principles, important statements that we make about who we are as United Methodists in issues of social justice and morality. And then finally, we wanted to remove all the harmful language. And we went a little bit beyond that. We added some protections in places that list other groups of people that are protected. We added sexual orientation and gender identity, which are really important protections to be added, as we know those have been places where people have been done harm in the past. And so anyway, as we achieved that first step of removing the ban on gay and lesbian clergy, which had been in place for 40 years, the picture captured, I was holding hands, Cameron and I were holding hands with all of the head strategy team that was helping to organize us. And I just immediately was overwhelmed with grief. The fact that one of my beloved friends, someone who's been a father to me, the first gay Christian that I met that really pushed me to think and act differently in relationship to my LGBTQ siblings, BJ. He died a year ago. I desperately wanted him to be there in that place at that moment. And at the same time, I was hit with an overwhelming sense of joy in knowing and feeling his real presence in that moment. It was a weird mixture of emotions, and so all I could do was just weep. And an AP photographer caught that moment, and it was a sacred, beautiful moment, but also at the same time, had I had any awareness, I would have stepped away so that my colleagues who are queer could have been centered in that moment. The camera found the one cisgender straight ally in the group, and then from the AP went to all the different New York Times and CNN. And as beautiful and sacred as that moment was, I really wish that my queer siblings had been centered in that moment. So, but yeah, I felt a lot of the same emotions, and I think part of the emotions we all felt was the collective emotion in the room, feeling everyone's emotion together, and the emotions reaching back for 52 years of all those people that had passed the baton along the way. One person I thought of in that moment was Julie Wood. She's a lay person in the United Methodist Church. She lost her son Ben to suicide because the United Methodist youth director thought it was his place to shame Ben at youth group for being gay. And those are the people I held in my heart at that moment. Those are the people that kept me in this fight personally for 12 years. Even when I left RMN, those are the people that kept me in to see this day come, and those are the people that are continue to propel me forward to make sure that we actually live into this. Because we only have to look back to Jim Crow to know that changing laws doesn't change a culture. And we've got a lot of work to overcome the harm and to live into this. And to that we know that if we achieve justice for LGBTQ people at the expense of Black and brown people, then what is it worth? So we have to do this collectively, all together, and intersectionally.
I think what you may have done, Andy, is you may have already started to answer what was going to be my grand intuitive question that I was going to put to everyone, and that is, now that this is done, now that 52 years of following a wrong path, I think, or following a harmful path has been changed, at least in the rule books, and by unfortunately, a disaffiliation by what amounts to 25% of the members of this denomination. I would like to ask each of you to kind of get out your little crystal balls at this point and say, and I'll start with you, Andy, because you're a senior pastor at a congregation, what do you see happening in the near term in those remaining 75% of United Methodist churches, to use your term, to live into this? What do you see?
Well, I'm gonna actually lift up Helen in this moment. Helen has one of the most beautiful gifts that I've ever seen in another person, and that is they have the ability to walk into the most angry of congregations, into a room where perhaps most of the people, the majority of the people in the room, think certain things about Helen that aren't true. And Helen has the gift of love and grace in the face of discrimination and hate. And I've watched Helen more than once change hearts in front of my very eyes. And Helen has done that again and again across the Southeast in places where it's not easy. And I think more of that work will have to be done by all of us. But I just want to give Helen a big shout out for that, for the... It takes a really strong person to be able to do that again and again and again. And Helen, I think a lot of this vote, the margin of this vote, is in big part due to who you are and how you've given yourself to this.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Andy. I think we all all of us bring different things to this work, and none of it happens without all of us doing it. And for whatever reason, which I don't really fully understand, I don't mind walking into those spaces. I just don't. It is just, that is how it is. I don't mind. In fact, yesterday I watched a sermon from one of the churches I visited I did this prayer pilgrimage on the way back from St. Louis a couple of months ago, and visited a church and chatted to the pastor, and he was really not happy about what was happening. And I watched his sermon online from Sunday, and he's still really not happy about what's happening. But so the work, the reason I feel that way about the work, and the reason I feel this sort of sense of leaving the door open for everyone for change, is because that's my story. I changed my mind about myself and people like me, and it didn't happen quickly. It took a long time, and so my feeling is we just have to give people time. So, Don, to your point, the work ahead of us is creating space, resources, conversation opportunities for this conversation to be fully engaged. And I think what I hope is going to happen is that the removal of the language will give permission to a lot of people who have been on the edge of wanting to explore this conversation, but have always pointed to the Book of Discipline and said, but the Book of Discipline. Like they had a sense in their hearts probably that something needed to change and this wasn't quite okay. But the Book of Discipline rules kind of provided a barrier for them against really pursuing it. So my hope is that the Book of Discipline changes will release people to be willing to engage in the conversation. And then our job at RMN and anyone else, frankly, that's interested is to connect with those folks, resource them, have conversation, have dialogue. And my hope is now, one of the things we did was we reversed the funding ban, which had created a situation where we couldn't, the church couldn't fund what they called the promotion of homosexuality, which is nonsense, but there we are. So my hope is that the institution of the church will partner with RMN going forward. We don't need to recreate the wheel, but what does it look like for the church to partner with RMN in order to create resources and opportunities for these conversations, which have happened over the years, but they haven't happened with the permission or encouragement or participation of the institutional church. And so now my hope is that we would see partnerships emerging where where we would be working together to do that education, have those conversations, and bring us the point of living into the changes that we've made. And that's going to be another decades long journey. That's not going to happen overnight.
That RMN that you referenced, the Reconciling Ministries Network, that organization and organizations like it now have, I take it from what you said, at least the the Book of Discipline capability to participate openly in making these efforts. Am I understanding that correctly?
My hope is that's what will happen. I don't think we can know for certain, but that's been my dialogue, as much as I've had it with bishops, has been, what does it look like for RMN to become a legitimized partner in this work as we move forward? And so how that actually plays out, I don't know exactly, but that's what my hope would be.
Okay, Andy, you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I just want to point to a beautiful speech Helen gave. There was a petition being debated on the floor about what to do with these disaffiliated churches, and Helen got up and beautifully argued for the door to be left open for these churches to be able to come home. They said they believed that a lot of these churches had believed things about people like Helen that weren't true. And maybe now they're starting to realize that, and we have to leave the door open. There are no closed doors in the kingdom of God. Cameron, I think we should just play Helen saying that, because they said it so beautifully. We played that at church on Sunday, by the way.
Oh my gosh, you did?
And a lot of people, oh yeah, we did. A lot of people were touched.
Okay, I recognize Helen Ryde, microphone 3, speech 4.
My name is Helen Ryde. I'm a lay delegate from the Western North Carolina Conference. I'm a home missioner. I'm an adult, white, non-binary person, and my pronouns are they, them. I rise to speak in favor of this petition because I am not the person I am now that I was 35 years ago. I lost track. I'm saying that to say my heart has been changed about who I am and how I exist in the world. But if you had told me that many years ago that my heart was going to change, I would have said no. Nope, it ain't going to change, because I'm quite sure what the Bible tells me about who I am. But I listened to God, and I listened to people who told me that the image of God was in me just as much as it is in people who are heterosexual and cisgender. And so I believe we need to leave the door open. You know, this move to bring our church to a new place has never, ever been about asking anybody to leave. Many of those who have left have believed gross mischaracterizations about people like me. And I believe many of them are realizing that maybe they shouldn't have believed them. And so in my heart, I hope and pray that we can have the grace to allow a way back. There are no closed doors in the kingdom of God. There is nothing that should prevent people from being in a relationship with us as a United Methodist Church.
We played that at church on Sunday, by the way.
Oh my gosh, you did?
And a lot of people, oh yeah, we did. A lot of people were touched. And Don, I think the other thing before I pass it back over to Cameron is we have to do even more around anti-racism and the patriarchy and all the work that's before us. at the intersections of justice. I know for us in St. Pete, that's going to mean showing up for these budget meetings to make sure that our city prioritizes the unhoused and doesn't simply try to give more money to the police, thinking that will solve a homeless issue. That will instead invest in social workers. But each church, each community has their own context, and we'll have to determine how best to live out this new call and new freedom to do justice work together.
That's outstanding, and I appreciate it. I have a couple more points, but Cameron, you've been around this church organization for a long time. How do you see the changes in the rules changing the church?
I spent a long time in, after I first got involved with RMN as a volunteer or helping Andy out with the live stream way back in 2013. I moved to an area in the South where I ended up unintentionally being pretty isolated from the movement. And so in 2019, I felt like I was the only one that was sad about everything that was going on and I know that's not true, but within my community and apart from a handful of friends of mine, it seemed like we had to be pretty quiet about these kinds of conversations. And my main hope is that this conversation can be brought more to the forefront, and that our perspective of how everything has gone down, others can become more aware of how this has affected a bunch of people, and that hopefully a lot of the more toxic rhetoric that's been surrounding a lot of these disaffiliations, that'll start to fall by the wayside.
I would love to see that happen, that the level of dialogue be greatly elevated from what we see today. That was going to bring me to one other kind of area of inquiry, Helen, and then kind of close it out at that point. And it is this: you've touched on it a little bit, saying that you're hopeful that the change in I'll call it the de jure changes, will become real changes, de facto changes. Do you have any kind of impression or idea about how the overall political environment in the United States, and frankly all over the world, and the levels of hate and conflict and divisiveness might have an effect, or might have either a chilling effect or not on the moving forward with I'll call it the new way of the United Methodist Church? Do you have any comments or ideas or impressions about that as we wrap up our broadcast here today?
So, one of the reasons that I was disappointed that the disaffiliations happened, but I am cognizant of the fact that, the disaffiliations have not meant that we have a monolithic church. And one of the reasons I stay with the United Methodist Church is that actually I believe we could have a significant role to play in combating exactly what you just described, right? In bringing people to a place. I feel like, the United Methodist Church hopefully can still be a place where people gather in the same room as other people that they wouldn't otherwise be in the same room as. And that, to me, is the only way that we're going to get through the current political strife and the discord and I live in Haywood County in North Carolina, and it's a very red county. Let's just say that. And we've one of the things that I hope our local United Methodist churches can do, in fact, the emerging faith community I'm part of, we've been talking about doing, is how can we play a part in bringing people together? How can we intentionally move into spaces that might be maybe uncomfortable for us in the first instance, but with the intent of being in dialogue and community and connection with people with whom we might have many, many differences. I think the church, isn't that what Jesus did? I mean, if you just look at the disciples, Jesus brought together a group of people who, under any other circumstances, would not have been communicating with each other, would not have been in community with each other. And so my strong hope is that the United Methodists, if we continue to lean into and live into this, can be an agent for change, can transform the world, which, by the way, is what we've been telling people we've been trying to do. That we can be a transforming player in this current situation. And for sure, our communities need that desperately. They really do. And so that's my hope. My hope is that as we live into this, we see the bigger picture, all those things that Andy just named, these are all areas where we need to be seeking ways of increasing dialogue, connection, community, conversation. And I hope we can be a part of that.
I remember, I'm always fond of quoting history, and I remember President Ulysses Grant said one time, there are three great political parties in America, the Republicans, the Democrats, and the Methodist Church. I don't know if there'll ever be that kind of an environment again, but we are the only religious organization that owns a building in the Capitol.
That's true.
So Andy, let's hear from you as we wrap it up.
I just want to lift up one beautiful moment that happened in the debate, and that was at our closest vote. We knew it was going to be our closest vote over the conversation of marriage.
Yeah.
Defining Christian marriage.
Yes.
And the way kind of we did our strategy, there were a lot of different, obviously, perspectives, but we really tried to center our queer delegate caucus. And they were at the center of helping us decide if we were going to compromise anything, where would that line of compromise end? What were we willing not to compromise? And a moment came up, and there had been some ideas floated around marriage. One prominent pastor in Methodism suggested that we could say that traditionally marriage has been between a man and a woman. However, now, blah, blah, blah. And that was a compromise we weren't willing to make. The queer delegates and many others said, no, that goes too far. We don't need to have the past represented anymore in our discipline. But as a surprise, a delegate from, Helen, do you remember where she was from?
Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. So a delegate from Zimbabwe who was actually a member of the Supreme Court there in Zimbabwe, and also a newly elected member to our Judicial Council in the United Methodist Church, she stood up and proposed what she called a double-barrel definition of marriage. I did not have the word double barrel on my bingo card for being the word that was going to solve everything. But she proposed a twofold definition of marriage, that marriage is between a man and a woman or between two other individuals of consenting individuals of legal age. Well, it's very clunky the way it's all said, and it's clunky because we're a worldwide church where you have to say things like consenting age, but anyway, to describe marriage as both between a man and a woman or between two other persons was a beautiful way of describing our understanding of marriage across the globe And even here in the United States, I believe Cameron, we still do marry men and women, right? Here in the United States? Yeah, we haven't
That's
gone all gay
correct.
yet. Yes. So it's a compromise that doesn't compromise anything, right? Because even here in the United States, marriage could be between a man and woman. It could be between two men. It could be between two non-binary people. All those things describe marriage. And so if saying it in that way allowed parts of the world to stay in relationship with us on this and to continue to dialogue with us, continue to be in relationship with us, the queer delegates, as far as I understood, were 100% behind this compromise, in support of it. And it could be a compromise that could lead, I think, to more changed hearts around the globe later, because they're willing to stay in the conversation. And so I thought that moment was pretty beautiful.
That was actually my favorite. That was my favorite moment of a general conference. If you were to ask me what was the most spirit-filled moment of conference, I'd say it's that moment, because it was an idea that, so many of us have been racking our brains for all these years, and none of us had come up with that solution. And then right from nowhere, right from, a woman from Zimbabwe, this Supreme Court justice from Zimbabwe, comes an idea that none of us had thought of. And I just think that's beautiful. Like trust the Holy Spirit to create something where none of us had seen before. That's my favorite part of General Conference right there.
Well, and I can tell that was kind of an eye-opener for everyone there, likely a pivotal moment. I want to thank you, Helen, Andy, and Cameron, for your insightful and really open conversation about what happened during what I dubbed Ground Zero, or Landing Zone X-ray, for 2 weeks in the United Methodist Church. I want to tell you that it brings home to me, who wasn't there, the import, the not only emotional but cognitive and every other kind of importance that should be put on that 2 weeks in Charlotte. I want to thank you, those of you who are listening to us or will listen to this podcast when it is placed on the network. I want to thank you for listening to No Hate Radio today. Specifically, thank our speakers for their perspectives and wisdom. I would invite everyone sincerely to visit our website at nohateradio.com. And I would also invite you sincerely, under that website, you can send an email directly from the website to our office here. You can suggest things that you might want to talk about. There are no real boundaries except hate. We don't allow hate. We don't allow hate speech. But otherwise, we don't have boundaries. Send us an email. Call our listener line if you would be more convenient for you at 442-4-NO-HATE. Provide us with your comments, questions, or suggestions for future topics. I'll make my final comment on the 52 years that's been involved in the process of bringing the United Methodist Church to where it is today. We have a theme song on this No Hate Radio broadcast called No Stranger to the Rain. I think all Methodists can relate right now to there's been a fairly long period where we were no stranger to the rain, and maybe now we're going to beg, steal, or borrow a little sunshine. With that, this is No Hate Radio.